Hi, I'm Dan Sweet. I'm Director of Public Relations and Communications for Helicopter Association International, and we'd like to welcome you to today's At Work webinar. We had originally planned to have this as a live presentation, but as most of you know, our industry schedules change pretty rapidly. And so things didn't work out quite the way we wanted. We are pleased to bring you a recording of Dr. Scott Shappell's presentation from HAI Heli-EXPO. He taught this class as a rotor safety challenge course this year. And we felt that it was valuable and important that we wanted to make sure that everybody had an opportunity to see it, even if you were not able to join Heli-EXPO in Atlanta this year. And we hope that you'll be able to join shows in the future, because this is an example of some of the really great classes that are available for free during the show. They are not inside the show floor, which means that anybody can attend them. So if you're in the Southern California area coming up for Anaheim 2024, this is opportunities for you to get some free training on a variety of topics. So let's go ahead and get started. Today's topic is a human factors class, red light, green light, investigating not only what went wrong, but what went right. Gotta find the right button on this screen. There we go. Dr. Scott Shappell is a professor for and chair of the Human Factors and Behavioral Neurobiology Department at Embry-Riddle University. Before joining the faculty at Embry-Riddle in the fall of 2012, Shappell was professor of industrial engineering at Clemson University for 7 years. And prior to his time at Clemson, he was the Human Factors Research Branch Manager at the FAA Civil Aerospace and Medical Institute. Dr. Shappell holds a doctorate in neuroscience from the University of Texas Medical Branch. Our webinars, we do encourage you to ask questions. Now, because Dr. Shappell is not able to join us today, he did say that he would be willing to answer any questions you have via email. So what we'll do is we will gather up the questions from you, forward them to Dr. Shappell, and we expect that he'll be able to respond. Now, at the end of the recording today, and I'll try to keep it up on screen for just a couple seconds to give you a heads up, he does have his own personal email address on the screen. And so you are welcome to write him directly, or you can send your questions to us. If you do if you want to send the questions through us, please use the question module. The chat feature is great. We do pay attention to it, but we know that the question module is the best way to go for us. These webinars are being recorded. We will, a recording of a recording. We will post this recording to our website and our YouTube channel probably tomorrow afternoon. It might be sometime early next week. Our videographer is in training right now, and so he may not be able to get things done quite as quickly as he does normally, but we will get this posted as fast as we can. So I'm going to stop sharing for just a second so that I can bring up the movie on my other screen, and we'll get started with that. Of course, it wants to reload. Love technology. Give me just a second here. There we go. I'm trying to get it up now. Sorry about this. It usually is not quite so disjointed here. Now let's try this again. Wow, it just does not like my video screen here today. Okay, let's try this. Hopefully this will work. I'm going to bring this up now. If somebody will give me a thumbs up or send me a note that you can see this, or Jasmine, can you tell me if it's viewing okay? Sorry about this, everyone. This is just a
I
bit.
can see it, Dan, in case you can't see yourself. It's up.
Oh, okay, yeah, no, I can't see it. So I'm gonna go ahead and get things started. Thank you for your patience with this. We'll see you at the end of the video. It's about 50 minutes long. The audio is just a little bit weak, and there is a movie within the presentation, and that's also got some interesting audio issues, but we tried to make it as best we could. Thank you.
All right. We're going to go ahead and get started because I'm the only one keeping you from lunch, I think. And for those of you who want to bug out, but I guess there is a lecture at 12:15, so hopefully if you're sticking around for that, that'd be great. So I'm Scott Shappell. I'm at Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University. I'm a professor and chair of the Human Factors Behavioral Neurobiology program there. Some of you who know who I am know that I also have had kind of a fun past. Spent a career in the Navy, first part active duty, second part when I was in the reserves, and then ended up in the FAA during a part of that time, managing the research lab out in Oklahoma City at CAMI, and then ended up in academia, which is the best job I've ever had. It's like stealing money, as I tell everybody, because you kind of make your own hours, you have fun, you get a lecture, do all those things I like to do. And I started at Clemson University as a professor of industrial engineering, then moved down to Embry-Riddle, where we built a doctoral program in human factors and a degree in aerospace physiology, as well as a few other programs that I manage. But I'm here not to talk about that. I'm here to talk about where we have went in the last maybe 5 to 6 years in accident investigation. So many of you know Doug and I, through our efforts over the last couple decades, looking at the Human Factors Analysis and Classification System, or HFACS. Many of you in the room are familiar with that. But when we developed this, it originally, it's a reactive system. When we first put it out there, when we first developed it, I was in charge of human factors for the Atlantic Fleet. So I had 6 aircraft carriers, 110 squadrons that I was now all of a sudden in charge of for human factors, not obviously in charge of operations. But basically what I was a glorified accident investigator. And it was a very, very busy job because back then, when I first took over the position, we were losing about 25 to 30 aircraft a year, as well as now you double that in the number of aircrew that we were losing, and it was really ugly. Not to mention other property damage, civilian loss of life occasionally. There was a whole bunch of stuff that was going wrong. And my job, I'll never forget the admiral when I walked in the door that day. He said, "Doc, you're going to be successful. You'll make commander." I was a lieutenant commander at the time. "You'll make commander if you can reduce the accident rate by half." Now, I thought that was a pretty reasonable task. I thought, okay, that doesn't sound too hard. I don't have to get rid of them all. And at the time, I didn't know what I was getting into. I said, "Oh, yes, sir, will do." And not realizing what an idiot I just was. And I'm sure they were still chuckling to this day about that day I went in and said I was going to cut it by half. But as it turns out, we have. Not necessarily all because of me. I don't want to take credit for all that. But a large part of that was because we started looking at the right things to fix. And so HFACS was developed as a reactive system to basically identify human factors that caused accidents. And I spent, well, the rest of my life doing accident investigation, many field investigations, but more actual investigations in the chain of command, and then going back historically and looking at archival data. One of my problems was, and the thing that always frustrated me when I went out and did an investigation, is that I was always seen as the bad guy. No matter what I said or did, when I walked in the room to interview somebody, I was the villain. I was the bad guy. I was the cowboy with the black hat. And I really wasn't internally, I'm not out to get anybody. I'm just trying to prevent it from happening again. But try and convince that to somebody whose job is on the line. It's almost impossible. Because in reality, what am I doing? I'm going out and identifying human error. And when I'm identifying human error, those unsafe acts, anytime you start using words like errors, violations, skill-based errors, people, shields go up. And I understand that. Anytime we go in and we start talking about things like mental states, wow, we get everybody spooled up. Physiological states, physical mental limitations, look out. We have to look at those things because that's where a lot of the problems arise. And we looked at supervisory issues as well. This isn't a lecture to talk about those categories. I apologize if you're not terribly familiar with this, but we would be here all day. I just got done doing a 2-day workshop where we spent the whole first day going over this. So I'm not going to go into detail, but I want you to understand that I was frustrated just like you are. I always was the villain, but I really didn't feel like a villain. I felt like I was in it to try and prevent it from happening again. So Doug and I were sitting around, and I said, you know, what really ticks me off is I'm always looking at what went wrong. I'm never looking at what went right. Although I do, I just ignore it. In fact, most of us, when we do accident investigations, the people will tell us or will explore actually what went right, but that's not interesting. It's not sexy. It's not something we like to write down because that's not what our bosses want to know. Our bosses want to know what went wrong and who to pin it on. And how do we prevent it from happening again? And by golly, somebody's going to be held accountable. When I look at that, I started thinking, I wonder if we could use this to look at what went right. And I started thinking, you know, a lot of times when I'm exploring, when I'm going out and doing an accident investigation, I want to know what prevented it from being a lot worse, because most of the investigations you do are not fatals. Most investigations we do or could do are near misses, fender benders, incidents, not accidents, things that could have been a lot worse had it not been for somebody or something happening that prevented it. But we don't ever note that. We never write it down in the investigation. We never explore it the way we do a full-blown accident. So with this idea in mind, about 7 years ago, we started putting something together. About 4 years ago, NASA came along and said, I love that idea. Others had said that too, because we'd kind of been floating it out there whenever we were talking. And NASA said, I'd like to do something with that. And I want to take you to an incident, not an accident, that happened at NASA that many of you never even heard about. Some of you may have. It's called EVA 23. How many have heard of EVA 23? Anybody? A little bit, maybe? So EVA stands for extravehicular activity. So this happened on the space station where we nearly drowned an astronaut. And you're thinking, when I first heard this, when they called me up and said, we'd love you to do red light, green light on EVA 23, and I'm like, okay, well, what happened? They said, well, we almost drowned an astronaut. I'm thinking, wow, I didn't know they had water up there. I didn't know, like drowning in a bathtub, what did they drown in? Turns out it's not that hard. But rather than me tell you what happened, let me introduce you to a video. Let's see if we can cue up this video here, because it's about a 15-minute long video, but it's an excellent. I can't do it any better than he did. So this is Chris Hansen. He's the director of all extravehicular activities at NASA. He's a bigwig, but he does a really nice job. A great guy, by the way. Let's see if I can get this rolling. Okay.
In 1998, work began on the world's most important scientific laboratory, the International Space Station. That work involved thousands of hours of design, testing, and wrench-turning manual labor. Because it was assembled for the first time in space, an area we call low Earth orbit, the astronauts had to don the iconic white spacesuit called the EMU, which stands for Extravehicular Mobility Unit. In these spaceships for one, astronauts are able to work safely and comfortably in the most hostile environment known to humankind. Usually in pairs, astronauts exit the airlock of the ISS in order to begin what we call extravehicular activities, or EVAs. Most EVAs typically last about 7 hours, have been simulated several times, and involve slow, deliberate, and uneventful work. We like boring EVAs. But this one was different. I'm Chris Hansen of the EVA office here at NASA's Johnson Space Center and former chairman of the Mishap Investigation Board. I've been with NASA for 26 years, and over those years I've encountered some truly amazing people, experiences, scientific discoveries, and incredible stories. The story I want to share with you today is what brought me to the Mishap Investigation Board, and in my opinion is one of the most important stories that NASA has to tell. When we almost killed an astronaut. On July 16, 2013, Italian astronaut Luca Parmitano and American Chris Cassidy began EVA 23 at 6:57 a.m.
Chris and Luca are ready for another great EVA. Luca, you can head to node 1.
On my way. And I'm on my way up to Cedarspur.
Their task that day was to connect a series of cables for a new Russian module. Relatively uninteresting work. About 40 minutes into their 10-hour workday, Luca calls down to Mission Control in Houston, Texas, and informs them that his CO2 sensor has stopped working.
CO2 sensor bed alarm. CO2 sensor bed.
Copy.
Major 48.6. Copy that, Luca.
I got an alarm inside my helmet. I looked down, and my computer told me that there was a problem with the CO2. I went through the checklist. I realized that it was a sensor failure. The ground came back and told me, yeah, we agree it's a sensor failure. Just keep monitoring your health, keep monitoring your own performance, and continue with the EVA.
This isn't necessarily alarming on its own. It's happened before, and astronauts are trained to look for the signs of CO2 buildup in case something goes wrong. So the alarm is dismissed. But nobody predicted that it would be the harrowing symptom of a much bigger problem. Six minutes later, about 44 minutes into the EVA, Luca calls Mission Control again.
I feel a lot of water on the back of my head. Are you sweating? You working hard? I am sweating, but it feels like a lot of water.
Luca, we copy.
Just FYI.
This is highly unusual and might not seem like that big a deal until you consider the way water behaves in zero gravity. In space, water doesn't just run down the back of your neck and soak your clothes. Instead, it sticks to your skin like gel and moves freely along the surface of your head.
Hey, Luca, while you're working there, can you give us maybe some more words on the water? Maybe identify the source, you think, and then is it getting any worse or is it the same?
It's still the same, and I cannot tell you the source.
I reported that I felt some water inside the helmet, but my initial thought was, this is just a nuisance. That is not something that I'm worried about.
Over the next few minutes, the pooling water slowly increases in volume as Luca and the mission control team on the ground try to figure out where the water could possibly be coming from. At this point, Chris Cassidy stops working and goes over to Luca to try to help figure out what's going wrong with his suit.
Oh, I see. I see it now. Wiggling.
And Chris and Luca, you guys can just hang tight there. Chris, you can continue to help troubleshoot if need be, but we're going to talk about it here for a minute.
At that call is when I had the thought of, oh, well, gosh, This is going to take the ground team a little bit, maybe 15, 20 minutes, half hour. But that's okay because we have this half-hour buffer already, so we're doing fine.
I don't understand where it's coming from. It can't be it has to be the bag.
In the front of the EMU, the astronauts have a drink bag full of water with a straw that allows them to drink. Luca drinks all of the water to see if it stops from entering his helmet.
The bag is dry now. Yeah. Bag is empty now, and so there's something less than a liter in the back of his head, 800 milliliters maybe.
Copy, Chris. We're talking about it.
At 61 minutes into the EVA, water begins getting into Luca's ears, affecting his communication headset, instantly making a worrying situation much more difficult to resolve.
Hey Chris, can you say radio check? Radio check? Yeah, comm check. Comm check. Yeah. I'm wondering if the water is getting into my ears. Oh yeah.
Luca, can you give us a status of where you think? It sounds like we just heard you cannot hear. Is that true as well?
No. I can hear perfectly. I can still hear perfectly. But my head is really wet, and I have a feeling that it's increasing.
Because astronauts spend so much time in the EMU, they wear a special garment under their suit that uses water cooling technology and wraps tubes around their body to keep them cool.
So what I'm wearing is the liquid cooling ventilation garment, LCVG. We've got these cooling tubes woven into the fabric throughout the whole garment. And what that does is as you work inside of the suit, you're building up a bunch of heat. The cold water runs through these lines, it picks up the heat of your body, and then once these pieces are connected, the warm water, after it passes through all those lines, goes back into the backpack of the suit.
Luca offers that source as an explanation for the water, but it is ruled out and dismissed.
Right now, the flight control teams have the astronauts standing by while they continue to assess the situation.
Although the EVA is officially still active, the astronauts have stopped working completely.
Based on what we heard with Lucas saying that water is in his eyes now and it seems to be increasing, we think we're going to terminate EVA case for EV2.
It's important to note that the EVA has not been officially aborted. Luca's situation is not yet considered an emergency.
The most catastrophic situation is abort an EVA, and that means end everything, stop what you're doing, leave it all out how it is, and hurry as fast as you can back to the airlock, and whoever the affected person is probably is going to need some help. Terminate the EVA, which is the situation we are in, is really defined as, hey, this is kind of trending in a direction that we're not super comfortable with, but everything is okay right now, everything is safe, we're doing fine, but we anticipate if we keep out here, it will get worse.
I had Chris, my buddy, outside with me, right in front of me, and I had to separate from him. And I had this feeling that it would have been so much better if he could just come with me. So I just thought, hey, the ground told me to go back. Chris, he isn't raising any concern. I shouldn't be concerned, and I can deal with this. But I just remember really well, it's a vivid image in my head that when I turn around, I just have this feeling, I just wish Chris would come with me.
As the standard safety protocol, the astronauts are tethered to the space station to keep them from floating away in the event of an accident. And although Chris and Luca are tethered to the space station, their tethers go in different directions, forcing them to separate as they make their way back to the airlock.
And he had already started to move, and the sun had just set. Now the sun sets, Luca turns the corner, and I have this image imprinted in my mind of the silhouette of his spacesuit turning around the backside of the space station into the darkness, and off he goes.
There's something to say about a sunset in orbit. It is not like one of those beautiful sunsets that we're used to enjoy here on Earth, where for several minutes you can enjoy light and dusk and the colors and all that. In orbit, it goes from pure white, bright light to darkness and complete void of color in instants.
The International Space Station orbits the Earth at over 17,000 miles per hour and takes about 90 minutes to go completely around it. A little less than half that time is spent on the side opposite the sun, blanketing the space station in total darkness.
So as soon as I separated from Chris, I started working my way back to the airlock. At the same time, maybe because of the motion that I did in the rotation, the water that was concentrated around my forehead and around my ears instantaneously covered my eyes. It covered my nose. In that split second, I knew I was in trouble.
In addition to that, Luca's ComCap assembly quit functioning, so he could no longer hear. So for the next 5 minutes, Luca was completely silent and alone.
Hey, Chris. I hear you, Luca. Go ahead. Luca, I hear you.
And I said,
"Hey, Chris, I'm disoriented. I need some help."
I hear you, weak but beautiful, Luca. Can you tell me where I can barely speak you?
I was lost. I wasn't sure which direction to take.
It's nighttime. He's on the back of the space station. He can't see. And if you let go with your hands, you are a free-floating guy in space.
I couldn't even see the handholds that I was supposed to hold on to in order to go back. I didn't know how much time I had before the water reached my mouth and completely drowned me.
I'm opening the thermal cover, and I'm waiting for Chris to
Copy, thermal cover open. Yeah, we want to look at a hop in now. Do not connect your SCU. Chris, you will come in second and do the hatch hops.
Roger that.
While that was happening, I was hurrying up and coiling my cable that I had to make secure and leaving it there, and then going as fast as I could back on the front side of the space station down to the airlock to meet him there.
It's only once that Chris also enters the airlock that he's able to close the hatch and adjust his feet so he can see into Luca's helmet.
The water at this point is now around his head and entering his ear cups. All I was thinking about was closing that hatch.
Okay, Shane, the hatch is closed and locked.
Chris, great job. Karen, over to you.
Okay, here comes the equalization.
Roger that.
So now I'm inside the airlock. The airlock is closed and we are ready to repressurize. I had no way to pressurize, to counteract the pressure on my ears.
Hey, Luca from Houston, how you doing? Give us the status.
While the pressure increased, the pain became really unbearable. So I started yelling as hard as I could, as loud as I could, trying to send a message to Karen that was controlling the valve to slow down the repressurization.
With Luca presumably safe in the airlock, Chris's radio calls to him are all met with silence.
Luca, did you hear that? Chris, squeeze my hand. Everything okay? You okay? You okay? Squeeze my hand if you're fine, Luca.
So that's when it just naturally, we never pre-briefed it or talked about it before or anything, but we just reached and grabbed each other's hand, and I squeezed, he squeezed back, and I knew he was fine at that moment.
I'm trying to see him. He looks fine. He looks miserable, but okay.
Copy, that's great news. Thanks, Chris.
Hatch coming open.
Airlock Houston, if you could have some towels ready, that would be great.
Once they are past the airlock and inside the space station, astronaut Karen Nyberg and 2 Russian cosmonauts rush to Luca's aid to help get his EMU suit off. In their haste, a Russian cosmonaut rushes to remove Luca's helmet and is stopped by Karen. The suits have a delta pressure in them, and if you don't first remove the glove, you run the risk of the helmet shooting straight off. Karen catches this, however, and helps Luca egress the suit properly while he towels the water that's still clinging to his face. Luca was safely inside the space station, and his close call with death opened our eyes to a real problem.
So that's a better description than I could give you, and that's essentially, by the way, that video is available on YouTube. It's about an hour and a half long. They go through all of the investigation, and it's actually really, really worth your time if you have a chance to go take a look at it. Just type in EVA 23, and you'll get everything. And more importantly, you can actually download, if you're interested, the New York City phone book, which happens to be the International Space Station EVA suit water intrusion event. It's about yay thick. It's incredibly detailed, as one might expect from NASA, and available publicly. And that's what I was given. So I wasn't part of the original investigation. But about 5 years later, just before, like I guess it would be about 2018 is when NASA contacted us, because NASA was starting to do HVACs. They have their own version. They call it NASA HVACs, which is very similar to what classic HVACs is, what I showed you earlier. And they asked us to go in and take a look at this event, because one of the problems Chris Hansen had is that whenever there's a mishap, who do they blame? Every time. Now that's the second group, the astronauts. It's always the astronauts' fault. They didn't diagnose it properly. They didn't do this right. And if you read this report, it's loaded with that. It's loaded with all the things that people did wrong, nothing that people did right. And so they came to us because we had been talking about this red light, green light. They said, well, why don't we give this a whirl? So Chris Hansen and others said, I want to see what you can do with this. So the first thing we did, as one would expect, is we went back to this document and we said, okay, let's identify what went wrong. And let me tell you, NASA is a very interesting organization. I love them to death. They're a bunch of engineers, and they are very good at what they do. They put a man on the moon. They're sending missions to Mars. They're doing amazing stuff. But when it comes to accident investigation, they have proximate causes, intermediate causes, and root causes. I'm not sure what that all means, except that it's a laundry list. It's 2 pages long. They asked us to go in, read this document, and classify these causal factors using HVACs. Those of you that were in my workshop the past couple days could have easily done this. It's not rocket science. And for example, you could go in here and say, well, let me just show you what we came up with. Using HVACs, we were able to classify all of them. For example, the ground team allowed time pressures of impending EVA to influence their actions. Clearly a mental state. You know, we could go in and say, oh, I don't know, the airflow contamination procedure did not address the failure mode. Planning appropriate operations. The flight control team did not understand the failure mode. Could talk about decision making. All sorts of stuff we can go in here, and we can quibble with where we put them, but we put them there based on these pages of documentation to describe each cause factor. And you can easily do this, and it's pretty straightforward. You can go in, and now you can look at the next page and go in there and talk about some of the EV2's communication system failed due to water, technological environment. Of course, we don't make waterproof systems because you don't expect that. The program cut funding, resource management, all these things are causal factors that we could easily place within the HVACs tree, the umbrella, if you will. And we did that. And what typically people will do, which isn't unusual, is they'll come in and say, well, let's take a look at which boxes lit up. Those of you that have ever used HVACs have done this, and clearly you can see everything that was going wrong, all the way down to the unsafe acts, and we could actually look at causal pathways and everything, which I'm not going to bore you with here. But this is basically what most people do. When they use HVACs, they use it as a reactive tool to go in and ask the question, what went wrong, light it up, archive it, and then someday, somewhere, they're going to look at aggregate data, and this will be one of 100 or 200 cases. Great. That's kind of traditional HVACs. But the truth is, that didn't prevent, HVACs did not prevent what could have been the death of Luca Parmienta. But there was a lot of stuff out there that did prevent him from dying that day. And so Chris Hansen and Tracy Dillinger asked us to go in and look at this and see what went right. We spent a lot of time, a lot of investigating to figure out what were the good things that day. And I say that because here's the issue when you look at things reactively. I can honestly say that traditionally, most of us have this view that I would argue it's more than 80 to 90%. I would say it's closer to 100% of accidents have human error causes. Rarely do things just go boom anymore without any human identified. HVACs has been very good at identifying those things. Historically, you can look at it online. There's thousands of articles written on this now, all kinds of data out there. Virtually every industry has their version of HVACs. And for the first time, we can compare our data amongst each other. Delta Airlines can compare their data to United or American or Southwest because they're all using it. It's a nice little tool. Same thing is with if you're a manufacturer. Would you like to know how are people crashing your aircraft? Because now I can design against it. And the human no longer is a black box. So it's been really good. It's been effective at that. And in fact, you can go in and look at aggregate data, which is what people do. For example, let's say we were looking at communication, coordination, and planning errors within NASA. Now, this is made up. This is not real. But it's pretty close. You can go in and say, I'm going to look at all the accident or near misses that occurred in 2015, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, over that 6-year time frame. And I would tell you roughly 25% of all the accidents have at least one communication failure associated with it. I don't think that should surprise anybody. That's not news to me. And it's been fairly consistent. Now, that's not their actual data. I will remind you again, this is just stylized for you because I can't just show their data. But I don't think anybody'd be surprised if I told you 25% of their near misses have at least one communication failure. And that's kind of nice. But does that really tell you the whole story? I would argue it doesn't, and let me tell you why. So, if I told you that if you came to visit me in South Carolina, Little Anderson, South Carolina, I live on a small horse farm out there, and you came out, and if you went in, and we went out in the backyard, beautiful, we have a huge, beautiful backyard, it's wonderful, and in the middle of it, you'll see what looks like a burn barrel, like an oil barrel, that you would burn stuff in, but it's not. It's an anti-elephant device. I paid a lot of money for that thing. It cost me upwards of 10 grand. I know you're laughing and thinking, oh my gosh, he must be telling a fib. No, it's a true anti-elephant device. And let me tell you, I've never seen an elephant in my backyard since I put that in there. It's got tremendous range because in our neighborhood, we've never seen an elephant. But if I take that device away, we're going to have elephants everywhere. Kind of sounds stupid, but had they had one of those, that's New York City, by the way. Had they had one there, they wouldn't have had an elephant. Now, of course, I'm making that up. That's not made up. But how many of you have had or have safety programs that are essentially anti-elephant devices? Yeah. How do you get the boss to get rid of it? How do you convince somebody that truly believes that anti-elephant device works? How do you get him or her to eliminate the program? Got any ideas? What do you do? What do you normally do? If you have a legacy program that you know doesn't work, how do you get rid of it? Or do you? Initiate the conversation? I'm your boss, just do it. I mean, think about this. It's very difficult, isn't it? How hard is it, particularly if you're like a new safety director? Yeah.
The first issue you have is you have to prove the negative.
Yeah.
The idea that the removal of the anti-elephant device will have no net effect. So you're proving, that's what you're stuck with trying to prove. And so to understand what you have to get through to your boss, you have to understand the problem.
Yeah.
To define the problem, you're trying to prove a negative to somebody who's deeply convinced of the positive. And it's kind of like dealing with evangelism in its own way,
Or aliens.
Yeah.
How many people believe in aliens? I can't prove they don't exist, but I can't prove they do. It's a problem. And if you have people that truly believe that something works, it's almost impossible. But you know what? Data is power. If we had some data where we could show the negative doesn't work. In other words, you could prove to me my anti-elephant device doesn't work without me giving it up first, then maybe we've got something. And so that's kind of what this whole green light thing is about. Because basically what we're doing is we're going out there and we're documenting what went right. In other words, when we went back and looked at the green lights associated with this event, there were many. For example, the extravehicular crew remained calm and professional with a professional demeanor throughout the emergency. Their mental state, that doesn't just happen. Let me tell you, if it had been me, first of all, my white spacesuit would not have been white anymore, okay? There would have been a real problem on the back end. Because what if I told you that these, both Luca and Chris Cassidy were both former military? They were both, did anybody notice Chris Cassidy's patch? He's a Navy SEAL, former Navy SEAL, combat Navy SEAL, not just somebody that went through the program. He's seen combat, heavily decorated. That's a pretty impressive dude and has been through a lot. So he's not going to rattle very easily. Not to mention, the NASA training gets them ready for this. He's not a pilot, but nevertheless, very calm. What if I told you Luca was Italian Special Forces, which he was? Again, it's not, this is, oh, that's okay. This is not, that'll work great in my next lecture because I sleep in fatigue, but no, I think this is a really big deal. When we look at this, these two were highly trained professionals. Not every one of us would have been able to do this. The EV crew had rapid focus and recognition of the water problem. They were trained to deal with this, and they dealt with it well, even though the report argues that, well, blah, blah, blah. Of course it did. We can go down here. I'm just going to skip down a little bit. The astronaut selection process yielded a unique crew capable of handling an escalated emergency in space. Do you know how much it costs to recruit a NASA astronaut? Do you have any idea? Millions. To put them through training, add more millions. And let me tell you, Congress and everybody wants to axe it every time they see it. It's like, why are we spending all this money? Why? Because of that. If you ask the NASA people that were familiar with for example, Chris Cassidy's recruitment, to a person they said, as soon as they met him, within 3 seconds, they knew this guy was going to be an astronaut, which is very unusual. Usually you go through all these psych tests and it's an impressive battery of things you have to go through. They knew right away this guy was going to be an astronaut, without question. So when you look at this, obviously the system worked in that case. Some of the other things, EV2 quickly reported the presence of water to the EV1 and the ISS crew. Everything was going the way it was supposed to. These are all the green lights. What's neat about that, and what makes that very interesting, and when I look at this, why it's so important, is because now we can go back and light up the green lights. Oh yeah, well, that's on there too. I think I had that on there, I'm not sure. If not, but that was a good one. It's the last one, yeah. Because let me tell you, that would have happened. It would have been an explosive. And it wasn't the Russians' fault. They're just trying to, because he's going to drown. And they're just trying to help him. And luckily, she was right there to twist his glove. I had no clue. I would have been, his head would have blown off because I would have blown it off. It would have been scanners all over the place, right? But here's the beauty of it. Now we can document the green lights. So let's say hypothetically, I don't know what happened to my other slide. Oh, hang on here. I don't know why that one got there. This is the slide I want. The other slide comes next. Now, this is what's really cool about this. So remember, I messed up the x-axis, don't worry about that. Remember, this was our communication coordination planning, our hypothetical. 25% of the near misses had at least one communication failure across that 6-year time frame. That's what I would call the actual threat. That's what they're experiencing today. The green lights are the resiliency built into the system. Had those green lights, had the anti-elephant device not been there, that's where we would really be. So the potential threat was much higher. It was up here. So in reality, we can document programs that are working and those that aren't. For example, what if somebody came in to the NASA administrator and said, you know what? Gosh darn it. We've had 100 near misses over the last 3 years, and we've investigated all of them. And we've looked at not only what went wrong, but what went right. And you know what? That program over there on communication coordination and planning that you put in place, it gets mentioned probably 40% of the time. That's what we're seeing there. 40% of the time on average, that program has saved the day or been part of saving the day. That program is worthwhile. But you know what? That other program over there that's dealing with, oh, I don't know, pick it. You know, the anti-elephant device in the corner has never been mentioned. That program that I know you like it, and I know you like the people, but it never's been mentioned in 100 cases over 3 years. And we're paying millions for that. I wonder if we should either modify it or get rid of it altogether. You now have the data. Data is power. It also protects your programs. Because what if all of a sudden you get a new boss who says, you know, that communication stuff, they just got to learn to play well. You know, we don't have a communication problem. And they want to eliminate the program. You can walk in the door and say, if you do that, boss, here's what you're looking at. We're going to be looking at 60% threat, not 20. If I walk in the door with a graph like this for every one of those boxes, what would it mean to you if I walked in the door and instead of the actual threat being here, the actual threat was at 50 and the green was really thin? What is that telling you? Yeah, it's telling you you don't have a safety program worth a snot for that particular box in HVACs. Yeah. If you get a graph that looks like 5% here and all the rest is green, you can feel pretty good. This gives you an ability to quantify what we've been talking about for years. So it's power. And so when I look at red light, green light, this whole idea is to give us as safety professionals the ability to go in and say, this program's better than that program. Here's where we need to pick up the pace because you know what? We've got no resiliency built in when I'm talking about decision making. I've got no resiliency built in when I'm talking about the physical environment. Whatever it is. And here's some areas where we maybe have more than enough effort. You know, how much lower can we get than 2%? You know, if it's really thin, why are we putting new programs into communication now? It makes no intuitive sense. Yeah. I don't know that I would necessarily argue to quit improving it. What I would argue is, do we really need to spend another $2 million on that when I have this bigger low-hanging fruit over here that I'm not addressing, that clearly I've built no resiliency into my system. You know, resiliency has been a buzzword in safety for the last several years. Nobody has shown me how to document it. Show me how you're going to document resiliency. Don't tell me about it. Show me how you're going to document it. HVACs is more than a reactive tool. It's also a proactive tool. This is just one example of that. We also look at gap analysis. We look at a bunch of other things using the HVACs framework as a proactive means to prevent accidents. Not just be reactive and walk in the door wearing the black hat. I'm tired of the black hat. I hope you are too. I would encourage you, and by the way, one of the arguments I've heard people say when we open up for discussion here in a second, just maybe I can avoid this one, is, you know what, we're already asking people to do a bunch of things in the field. I can't possibly ask them to do one more thing. Asking them to do a green light investigation is not, they're going to just shields up and they'll go into histrionics. Wait a minute. We've been doing this. We just don't document it. Every time I've been in an investigation, every one of them, I can't think of one where the person on the other side I'm interviewing didn't talk about some good things. I just ignored it, and I didn't explore it. They might have said, yeah, thank goodness I had that training on CRM. Oh, yeah, okay, great. And I moved on, because all I was interested in is what went wrong, not what saved the day. I certainly didn't put that in the report, because the report's all about what went wrong, not what went right. But you're right there capturing it. Why not document it? It's not more work. It's just documentation. I don't see this as a big deal. And that was the pushback initially we got at NASA. Oh my gosh, we can't go back and ask people to do this. They're never going to do it. Once you explain to them it's not extra work, and most investigators realize it's not, there was no pushback at all. Questions? Go ahead.
Yeah, I guess the other subtlety is you've got to treat the inclusion of a green light with the same level of due diligence as you do a red light, so that you don't spend time praising your pet project.
Oh, I agree. Couldn't agree more. Absolutely agree. Yes, sir.
On the question of applicability, it occurs to me that this is a reasonable tool to assess other safety things than HVACs.
Oh, sure.
But also, frankly, other programmatic issues. So, you know, you spend your whole day working on wheels and brakes, and you haven't had a wheel and brake problem for 15 years, but your pressurization systems fail every day.
Yeah.
You know, that's the kind of balancing act you would be looking at. We've compensated for the wheel and brake issue we had 20 years ago, but we got another whack-a-mole to deal with.
I agree. Couldn't agree more. I think it isn't just human factors. We just don't look at that. Other questions, concerns, thoughts? All right. Well, I hope I've given you a sense that there's more out there than just looking at what went wrong, that we don't have to walk around with black hats anymore. We can actually, and believe me, this is the other thing that was really kind of interesting. When you go out and you start talking to people about what went right, they open up about everything. Now, the relationship you've developed with that individual is a lot better. And it makes a difference. It makes a difference for the programs, because we can provide that feedback back to them that, wow, whatever you're doing is working. And here's some cases that you can use to show that it's been working. Because that's the other thing. So many times we bring consultants in to talk about something, but then they don't have a real world case to compare it to in my industry. And now everybody's like, yeah, that's great because that's fantastic for healthcare, but this is aviation, we're different. Or vice versa. And that's a sort of, so now you have actually green lights where I can actually use cases to reinforce the safety programs that are working. All right. I'm early. That's good. 10 till. That's always a good thing. Late is always bad. Thank you very much for your attention. That's lunch. You bet.
Okay, I'm going to pause this for just a second. You can see Dr. Shappell's email address there, scott.shappell at erau.edu. I'm going to leave for just a second. Use your phone, grab a screen capture, do a print screen off your laptop, or just write it down. There's a bunch of alternatives here. So I'm going to leave it up for just a second while I bring my controls back up here. And I'm going to stop sharing now. Get my camera back up. There we go. I think you can probably see why we wanted to kind of do this as a best of from HELI-EXPO. I thought his presentation was fascinating. One of the things that I really enjoy about this job is getting to learn. I'm not a pilot. And so being able to watch things like this is always really, really interesting for me. So let's go ahead and get things wrapped up now. See if I'm sharing here. I don't think so yet. There we go. We've got some webinars coming up here very, very soon. On April 27th, the company called Rain, they've been in the news the last couple of days. They're a new company, I believe, out of California that is doing firefighting with UAS aircraft. This includes drones and it includes larger aircraft. I understand that they were working with a remotely piloted Black Hawk to do some testing. So there's a lot of potential there. I thought it would be really interesting, especially leading into fire season. I know a lot of our operator members, a lot of our operators rather in this industry are always looking for new and innovative ways to fight fire, to continue to operate throughout the year, different locations. Just realized I'm not sharing. There we go. There's the schedule. Anyway, I think it's going to be a really interesting presentation from Rain. On May 11th, we do have a presentation on our new SMS assessment program. That's going to be with Chris Hill, our Director of Safety here at HAI. And on May 25th, some of you may know Randy Sharkey. He was another person who made a rotor safety challenge presentation during HELI-EXPO. And he is a designated pilot examiner, and he is going to talk about his DPE pet peeves. Now, I do want to also emphasize there's a really good chance we are going to have a very short notice, very special webinar, possibly next week, on some new regulations that are coming down from the FAA regarding, or some proposed rulemaking matters coming down from the FAA on the 5G issue. And this is going to be vitally important to companies who may have an exemption to conduct air ambulance operations around 5G towers, around 5G interference. And so please stay tuned. We will be letting people know through Rotor Daily. We'll be letting people know through email, through e-blasts and things like that. We expect that this will not be one of our regular webinars. We want to bring this to you as fast as we possibly can because we feel like it's that important. So please keep an eye on your emails for that. We hope that you found today's webinar informative. One of the things that we try to do at HAI is to provide information to the vertical aviation community. A couple of great ways to do that, if you're not already a subscriber to Rotor Daily or Rotor Magazine, is to sign up for both of those for free. We did understand that we've had some issues with our subscription sign up. Somewhere the computers were not talking to each other. We're trying to get that corrected right now. So if you've not been receiving those, I do apologize, and we're trying to get that rectified. Rotor Daily comes to your email box every business day. We try to get it out by noon on the East Coast, 9 o'clock on the West Coast, other time zones obviously around the world. But it's usually between 10 and 20 of the top stories involving the rotorcraft community. It means that you don't have to go through Google or any of the other news search services to find it. We'll bring it all straight to you. It just makes it that much easier. Rotor Magazine is an award-winning publication that we produce in-house. It's a quarterly publication. Has a lot more in-depth stories for the industry. You can see the latest cover there talking about the AW609. Seems like it's going to be a great aircraft. Both of those, again, are free. If you live outside the United States, there may be a small cost for shipping the magazine. Otherwise, everything else is free. There are digital options for both as well. Highly worth the time and the effort to get signed up for those. Easiest place to do that, rotor.org/subscribe is the web page for it. We will be sending out an email here soon, maybe today, maybe tomorrow, might be Monday as well, on feedback for the webinar today. We'd like to know what worked for you, what didn't, if you have any suggestions for future webinars, and if you have any ideas for presenters for the topics that you suggest. That's always helpful too. HAI is a membership-based organization. We do want your feedback on what we could do better as an organization. Best way to do that is to send Jim Viola, our president and CEO, an email. His email is president@rotor.org. Yes, I just learned to speak today. Thank you. He does pay attention to those emails. He sees every one of them. They come right to his phone or his computer. And then he, when necessary, assigns tasks to the staff to help out. That does bring us to the conclusion of our webinar today. We are grateful that you took the time to join us. We know that there's a lot going on. It's starting to get longer days here in the Northern Hemisphere. And so a lot more people are out flying, a lot more people are out working. And so we appreciate that you took time out of your schedule to join us. Until 2 weeks from now, or until we hold that FAA webinar on 5G, please be safe and fly safe, and we will see you again very, very soon.